I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I work as a tech consultant in a high-paying job. I've spent the last decade working hard to get to where I am today. I'm single and live in a modest apartment in a big city. Nothing fancy, but it's comfortable and all mine. It's been a long road getting here, but I'm proud of the life I've built. Unfortunately, my family doesn't see it that way. To them, I'm just the golden ticket, their personal ATM, and it's only gotten worse over time. To give you some background, my family is middle class and has always struggled financially, mostly due to poor money decisions. There's my mom and dad, both in their mid-50s, a younger brother who's 27, and an older sister who's 35. They're good people, but when it comes to money, their judgment goes out the window. Growing up, I remember them splurging on things they couldn't afford, like a new car when the old one was just fine, or a family vacation on credit cards that took years to pay off. So it's no surprise that their financial situation is still a mess. When I first started making good money, I didn't mind helping out. At the time, it felt good to be able to give back to my family. I covered a medical bill for my mom when she had an unexpected surgery, paid for some car repairs for my dad, and helped my brother with rent when he lost his job. It was small stuff at first, and I was happy to do it. But over the years, the requests became bigger and more frequent. It went from, "Can you help us out with this bill?" to, "We're planning a family vacation, and it would mean a lot if you could pitch in for the flights." Or my brother saying, "I need a new car for work, and I found this great one, but I'm short a few $1,000s. Could you cover it?" I didn't see the pattern at first. I thought I was just helping out here and there because that's what family does. But it started to feel less like helping and more like an expectation. The more I gave, the more they asked. It reached a point where they weren't even asking anymore, they were just telling me what they needed as if it was my responsibility to handle it. 6 months ago, I decided enough was enough. I sat them down and explained that I couldn't keep bailing them out every time they needed money. I was willing to help with true emergencies, but I wasn't going to fund their lifestyle choices anymore. The response was, not great. My mom immediately started crying, saying that I was abandoning them and that they had sacrificed so much for me. My dad said I was being selfish and letting money change me. My brother and sister were just as bad, saying I was acting like I was better than them now. It was a mess, and I left that conversation feeling like the bad guy, even though I knew I needed to set boundaries. Things were quiet for a while after that, and I thought maybe they had finally understood. But then, last week, my sister called me with a great opportunity. She said she needed $15,000 for a business investment that was guaranteed to double her money. The way she explained it, it sounded like one of those sketchy pyramid schemes, and I told her as much. I tried to be polite but firm and said no, reminding her of the boundary we talked about 6 months ago. That's when she lost it. She went off about how I was being unsupportive and didn't believe in her dreams. She said I had the money, so why was I being so stingy? I held my ground and told her I couldn't help this time. That's when she pulled the guilt card, saying, "After everything I've done for you growing up, this is how you repay me?" I couldn't believe it. What had she done for me? I've been financially independent since I was 18. If anything, I've been supporting her, not the other way around. A few days later, I got invited to a family dinner at my parents' place. I didn't want to go, but I figured it was better to face it head on rather than let this fester. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension in the room. My sister was giving me the cold shoulder, my brother was avoiding eye contact, and my parents had that look, the one they get when they're about to lay into me. We hadn't even finished the appetizers before my dad brought it up. He asked why I had refused to help my sister with her investment opportunity. I calmly explained that I couldn't keep giving out money, and that this didn't seem like a sound business idea anyway. That's when all hell broke loose. My mom accused me of turning my back on the family, saying I'd forgotten where I came from now that I was making good money. My dad jumped in, saying it was my duty to help out since they supported me when I was younger. My brother piped up, calling me a rich snob and saying I was acting like I was too good for them. It was a full-on attack, and no matter how much I tried to explain my side, they wouldn't listen. My mom started crying, bringing up all the sacrifices she made for me when I was a kid. She kept saying, "How could you do this to us? We're your family." It was like they had rehearsed it, and I was the villain of their script. I tried one last time to calmly explain why I needed to set this boundary, but it was no use. They didn't want to hear it. They just wanted me to hand over the money and shut up. The dinner ended with me walking out. I couldn't take it anymore. As I left, I heard my brother mutter, "You're going to regret this." I drove home feeling exhausted, but I knew I had made the right choice. I needed to share this story because I don't know if I'm in the wrong here or if my family is just being unreasonable. I've given them so much already. At what point is it okay to say no? Update 1. Why? After the blow-up at the family dinner, I expected things to be tense, but I didn't expect complete silence. My phone was eerily quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. At first, I thought maybe they needed some time to cool off, so I gave it a few days. But when a week went by and I hadn't heard from anyone, I decided to reach out. I called my mom first. No answer. I texted my dad and got a one-word response, busy. I even tried my sister, who's usually glued to her phone, but got left on read. It was like they'd all agreed to cut me off completely. The silence felt deliberate, like they were trying to punish me for saying no. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I decided not to chase them. If they needed space, I'd give it to them. A few days later, I was scrolling through Facebook when I noticed my sister had been posting some not-so-subtle statuses. Stuff like, "Funny how some people forget where they came from as soon as they get a little money and family should come first, but some people only care about their bank account." I knew they were aimed at me, and I wasn't surprised to see mutual friends and extended family members liking and commenting things like, "So true," and "You deserve better." It was clear she was trying to paint me as the villain. The next day, I got a long, emotional text from my mom. She said they had to pawn a few family heirlooms because they were struggling so much financially. She mentioned my great-grandmother's necklace and a watch that belonged to my grandfather, making it sound like they'd been forced into it because I refused to help. She didn't outright ask for money, but the implication was obvious. It felt like another attempt to guilt me into opening my wallet. I could feel the familiar tug of guilt, but I held firm. I'd made my boundary clear, and I wasn't going to back down now. Later that week, my sister sent me a message out of the blue. It was short and dripping with sarcasm. "Thanks for the support. I really thought you'd believe in me, but I guess I was wrong." I ignored it at first, but she followed up with a longer message about how hurt she was that I didn't believe in her business venture and that I was acting spiteful. I knew she was trying to manipulate me, to make me feel like the bad guy for not throwing money at her latest scheme. I decided to try one more time to clear the air. I suggested we meet up and have a calm, rational discussion. I offered to sit down with all of them, just to talk things through and try to understand each other better. But they refused. The response I got was a curt message from my dad saying, "You can come when you're ready to apologize." Apologize? For what? Not handing over $15,000? It was like we were living in different realities. The next bombshell came from a cousin who called me, concerned. Apparently, my brother had taken out a high-interest loan to cover the car payment I'd refused to help with last month. He hadn't mentioned any of this to me, of course, but now the family was blaming me for his financial mess. They were saying that if I just helped him in the first place, he wouldn't be stuck paying off a loan with sky-high interest rates. It was absurd, but it was also typical. Somehow, it was always my fault when their poor decisions came back to bite them. All of this stress was starting to get to me, so I decided to book a session with a therapist. I'd never been to therapy before, but I figured it was time to get an outside perspective. The therapist listened as I unloaded the whole situation, from the early requests for money to the current fallout. She validated my feelings and helped me see that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary. She suggested I think about creating a long-term plan to separate myself financially and emotionally from my family. It was hard to hear, but I knew she was right. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received an anonymous message. It was a simple text from a number I didn't recognize. "You'll regret treating your family like this." I don't know who sent it, but I have a pretty good idea. It felt like a thinly veiled threat, and it left me rattled. After I posted an update here on Reddit, explaining everything that had happened, the response was overwhelming. You guys were telling me to go no contact or at least low contact, but I wasn't sure I was ready for that step yet. I still felt a sense of obligation, even though I knew it was misplaced. I wanted to believe there was a way to fix things without completely cutting them off, but I was starting to doubt it. As if things weren't bad enough, my aunt reached out. She's one of those people who prides herself on being the family peacemaker. She told me I needed to be the bigger person and reach out again, make amends and smooth things over. It felt like yet another attempt to make me responsible for everyone else's bad behavior. I was starting to feel isolated, like I was the only one who could see how toxic this whole situation was. After a lot of back and forth in my head, I decided to go public with my side of the story. I made a post on my personal Facebook account, laying out exactly why I'd stopped giving money. I was careful not to attack anyone directly, but I made it clear that I'd helped more than enough, and that I was done being the family ATM. The reaction was a mixed bag. Some people were supportive, saying they'd been in similar situations and understood how hard it was to say no. Others criticized me for airing family business online, saying I should have kept it private. But I don't regret it. For the first time, I felt like I was finally standing up for myself, and it felt like a step in the right direction. Now I'm just waiting to see what the fallout will be. If the past few weeks are any indication, it's not going to be pretty. Update 2. My Facebook post set off a chain reaction I didn't fully anticipate. Within hours, the family group chat exploded. I wasn't even part of it anymore, but a cousin sent me screenshots. My parents were furious, accusing me of betrayal and saying I'd crossed a line by airing our private issues publicly. It wasn't long before I noticed that I'd been blocked by both of them. I didn't even get a direct message, just silence and a social media block. Classic. Then, the real onslaught began. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from cousins, aunts, and even a few distant relatives I barely talked to. They were angry, calling me selfish and ungrateful. A few went as far as to say I'd humiliated the family. It was clear the smear campaign had gone beyond immediate family. Now, it was spreading to anyone who would listen. I got texts like, "How could you turn your back on your own blood? And you've changed since you got rich." It was ridiculous, but also exhausting. At that point, I realized I needed to defend myself properly. I went back through my bank records, texts, and emails. It took hours, but I compiled a detailed list of every dollar I'd given to my family over the years. Medical bills for my mom, car repairs for my dad, rent for my brother, and countless smaller emergencies. By the end of it, the total was over $100,000. I had receipts for everything, bank transfers, payment confirmations, and even some old messages thanking me for the help. I decided I wasn't going to let them paint me as the bad guy without showing the full picture. I sent the list directly to my sister. It was a simple message, this is why I said no. I didn't add anything else. She read it almost immediately but didn't respond. For once, she was silent. I waited, half expecting some sort of apology, or at least a response, but there was nothing. It felt like she'd finally run out of things to say. Later that day, I got a call from a family friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She told me she'd seen the drama unfold online and wanted to check in. Surprisingly, she wasn't calling to berate me. Instead, she shared her own story about dealing with manipulative family members who'd leeched off her for years. She said she'd eventually had to cut them off too, and it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it was also necessary. Her support meant a lot, and it was a small relief to know I wasn't completely alone in this. That night, there was a loud knock at my door. It was my brother. He looked angry, angrier than I'd ever seen him. Without any pleasantries, he started ranting about how I'd ruined the family's reputation, and that I needed to take down my post immediately. He was yelling, pacing back and forth in the hallway, and it was clear he wasn't here for a calm conversation. He lunged forward like he was about to start a fight, so I stepped back and told him he needed to leave. He didn't listen, and the situation escalated quickly. I had no choice but to call the police. They arrived and told my brother to leave, warning him that if he came back, he could be arrested. It was surreal, watching this unfold in front of my apartment. It felt like we'd hit a new low point. I never thought I'd have to call the police on my own brother, but here we were. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I needed to know my options if the harassment didn't stop. The lawyer explained that I could file a restraining order if things escalated further, but suggested trying a cease and desist letter first. I decided to hold off for now, but it was good to know I had options if it came to that. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, but the handwriting looked familiar. Inside was a single piece of paper with a typed message: "You'll regret making enemies out of family." It didn't say who it was from, but I could guess. It felt like another threat, another attempt to scare me into submission. I posted an update here on Reddit about everything that had happened since my last post. The response was huge. The thread blew up, with you guys sharing their own experiences of family entitlement and toxic dynamics. I wasn't expecting so many replies, but it was strangely comforting to see I wasn't the only one dealing with this kind of situation. Not long after, I found out from a friend that my family had a gathering without me. It was the first time I hadn't been invited to a major family event. They'd even posted photos online, tagging everyone except me. It was a slap in the face, a clear sign that they were cutting me out as punishment. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Part of me was relieved, but it also hurt more than I expected. I brought it up in my next therapy session. The therapist listened and then asked me a question that stuck with me. Do you think this is the first real step towards independence? It was a painful question, but it made sense. Maybe this was the break I needed, the push to finally separate myself from all the chaos. I've made a decision. I'm going to start the process of going no contact. It's not what I wanted, but I don't see another option. The manipulation, the threats, the constant pressure, it's too much. I'm starting to realize that the only way I'm going to find peace is if I distance myself completely, even if it hurts. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but I know one thing: I'm done playing their games. It's time to put myself first, even if that means walking away. Update 3. After the last chaotic encounter, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I officially decided to go no contact with my immediate family. I blocked them all on social media, changed my phone number, and shared the new number with only a few trusted friends and my lawyer. It wasn't an easy decision, but I had to protect myself from the constant manipulation. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe this nightmare would finally end. But within days, the calls started. Unknown numbers, one after another. At first, I ignored them, thinking they were just spam. But then one day I picked up out of curiosity, and it was my aunt, the peacemaker of the family. She launched into a frantic rant, demanding I stop this nonsense and go back to the way things were. She told me to apologize, that my parents were heartbroken and didn't deserve this treatment. I hung up without saying a word. Blocking her number was easy, but it left me shaking my head at how quickly they'd found a way around the block. Then the letters started arriving at my apartment. The first one was from my mom, full of emotional guilt tripping. She wrote things like, "How could you abandon your own mother? And we've done everything for you, and this is how you repay us." It was almost laughable if it weren't so sad. Another letter came from my dad, more aggressive in tone, demanding that I be a man and take responsibility for the family. But the real kicker was the letter from my brother. It wasn't a plea or an attack, it was an invoice. He'd actually typed up a bill for emotional damages, listing out every time he believed I'd wronged him financially. It was absurd, like something out of a bad movie. I realized then that this wasn't going to stop on its own. I met with my lawyer again to discuss next steps. They recommended sending a formal cease and desist letter to my family, warning them that any further contact could result in legal action. I was hesitant. It felt harsh, but the lawyer was clear. This might be the only way to get them to back off. So we sent the letters. A few days later, my mom showed up at my workplace. I work in a secured building, so she couldn't get past the lobby, but she made a scene anyway. She was crying, telling anyone who would listen that I'd been brainwashed against the family. The receptionist called me down, looking concerned. I could see my mom through the glass doors, pacing and wailing like she was on a stage. Security had to escort her out, and I was left to apologize to my coworkers, who were staring at me like I was a criminal. It was humiliating. I brought it up in therapy the next day. My therapist helped me process the embarrassment, reminding me that this was a sign of how desperate my family had become. They suggested that I start considering a restraining order, especially after the stunt my mom pulled at work. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I knew it was the truth. This wasn't normal behavior, and it wasn't going to end unless I took stronger action. In the middle of all this, I found out from a friend that the family was now divided. My parents and sister were still fully against me, but a few cousins and even an uncle had reached out to say they understood why I was doing this. They shared their own stories of being guilted and pressured into giving money they couldn't afford. It was bittersweet. I was glad to have some support, but it felt like proof of just how deep the dysfunction ran in our family. Around this time, an old high school friend reached out after seeing the drama unfold on social media. They told me they'd gone through something similar with their own family and had to cut ties for their own sanity. We ended up talking for hours, sharing stories and venting about the stress of dealing with manipulative relatives. It was a relief to know I wasn't the only one who'd had to make such a difficult choice. Meanwhile, word got back to me that my sister's business venture had flopped, exactly as I'd predicted. Instead of taking responsibility, she was blaming me, telling everyone that it was my fault for not investing and that I'd cursed her with bad luck. It was the same old story, nothing was ever her fault. I could only shake my head at the audacity. I decided it was time for a fresh start. I started looking into job transfers and checking out apartments in a new city, far away from all this chaos. The idea of starting over was terrifying, but it was the only way I could see to truly get away from the constant harassment. Just when I thought things might be calming down, my brother showed up one last time. He looked different this time, almost defeated. He admitted that he was in over his head with debts and that the family had pressured him into trying to get money from me. For a moment, it felt like we might actually have a real, honest conversation. But then he ruined it by asking for a small loan to cover his latest credit card bill. I refused. He left, looking angry and hurt, but I felt a strange sense of relief. It was clear now that I wasn't going to be their savior anymore. The final straw came a few days later when I received another anonymous message, this time from a family friend. "You're tearing this family apart. If you don't fix this, someone else will." It felt like a threat, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I went back to the lawyer and officially filed restraining orders against my mother and brother. It was painful, but it was the only way to protect my peace and move forward. The drama isn't over yet, but I feel like I've taken the first real step toward freedom. Update 4. The restraining orders against my mother and brother were finally processed and served. I thought that would be the end of the worst of it, but I was wrong. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed with several angry voicemails from my father. He wasn't named in the restraining orders, but he was livid. He called me a traitor and accused me of turning my back on the family. He left 3 back-to-back messages, growing more furious with each one. It felt like he was trying to guilt-trip me into regretting the legal action I'd taken, but I ignored them. A few days later, my boss pulled me into a private meeting. At first, I thought it was about a project deadline, but then he showed me a list of calls my workplace had received. My family had been calling, claiming I was having a mental breakdown and needed immediate help. They even tried to make it sound like I was a danger to myself and others. The accusations were absurd, but it was a clear attempt to sabotage my job and damage my reputation. Thankfully, I have a solid relationship with my boss. He's seen my work ethic and knew something wasn't adding up. He assured me that my job was safe and that he could see through the manipulation. Still, it was a wake-up call. If they were willing to stoop this low, what else were they capable of? I started digging around to find out more about what was happening behind the scenes. A mutual friend from my hometown reached out and told me that my sister had been spreading rumors, telling everyone I'd lost it and was going through some kind of midlife crisis. The goal was obvious: discredit me before I could share my side of the story. She was painting me as unhinged, trying to make me look like the one who was out of control. It was infuriating, but it only made me more determined to protect myself. Some Reddit users suggested I take extra precautions. They advised me to set up a P.O. box to avoid giving out my real address and to tighten all my privacy settings across social media. I took their advice and locked down everything. I even went as far as changing my email and updating my security questions. It felt paranoid, but given how far my family had already gone, it seemed necessary. Despite everything, my parents made one last attempt at manipulation. I received a thick letter in the mail. Inside, there were pages filled with emotional pleas, talking about how they were on the verge of bankruptcy and how I was dooming them to poverty by cutting them off. They begged me to reconsider, saying that without my financial support, they'd lose everything. The words were dripping with guilt-tripping language, but there was something off about it. It felt more like a strategy than a genuine cry for help. I didn't respond. Then things took a darker turn. One night, I came home from work and noticed something strange about my apartment door. It looked like someone had tried to force it open. The lock was scratched up, and the door frame had small splinters, as if someone had been prying at it. I immediately called the police, but there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence. My gut told me it was my brother, but without proof, it was just a hunch. That was the breaking point for me. I installed a security camera outside my door the next day and shared the live feed with a few trusted friends, just in case anything happened. In therapy, I started to unpack everything that had been happening. I admitted that part of me felt guilty for taking legal action, even though I knew it was the right thing to do. My therapist pointed out that I'd been conditioned for years to feel responsible for my family's financial well-being, even when it wasn't my burden to carry. It was a lot to process, but I could feel myself starting to break free from that mindset. Not long after, I received an anonymous package in the mail. It was a plain brown box with no return address. Inside was a photo album from my childhood, filled with pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, and holidays. There was a handwritten note tucked inside: "Remember who you are. Remember your family." It felt like one last-ditch attempt to pull me back in, to make me reminisce and soften my resolve. Instead, I threw it away without a second thought. On a brighter note, my request for a work transfer was approved. I'd found a new apartment in a different city, far away from all the drama. I'd be moving within the month, and it felt like a fresh start was finally within reach. Just when I thought I was in the clear, my father called from an unknown number. He begged for a meeting before I left. Against my better judgment, I agreed, but only in a public place. We met at a small cafe, and he looked more worn out than I'd ever seen him. He started off by saying he never wanted things to get this far and blamed my mother and sister for escalating everything. For a moment, it felt like he might actually be sincere, but then he asked for money one last time, claiming that it would fix everything. I calmly told him no. I explained that this cycle of me bailing them out needed to end. He looked defeated but didn't argue. He just stood up and left without another word. Watching him walk away, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for, but it was the ending I needed. Now, with the move just weeks away, I feel like I'm finally on the path to real freedom. It's been a painful journey, but I'm ready to leave this chapter behind and start fresh. Update 5. The move went smoother than I expected. I settled into my new city and quickly realized it was exactly what I needed. The fresh start felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. My new apartment is smaller, but it's cozy, and I've already set up a comfortable workspace. The transfer at work was seamless, and my boss has been nothing but supportive through everything. It's been a relief to finally focus on my job without worrying about family drama every 5 minutes. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The anonymity of a new city was freeing. I didn't have to worry about running into someone who knew me or my family's mess. I started exploring my new neighborhood, joined a few local groups, and even made some friends who had no idea about my family issues. It felt like a chance to rebuild my life from scratch. But of course, my family wasn't done. A few weeks after I moved, a friend from my old city called me up, sounding concerned. They'd heard from mutual contacts that my family was telling everyone I'd gone missing. Apparently, my parents had been spreading stories that I'd disappeared, suggesting I was having a breakdown and had cut off contact because I wasn't in my right mind. It was obvious what they were trying to do, make me look like the unstable one who abandoned them, rather than admit I'd made a choice to go no contact. The next twist came when a private investigator showed up at my door. At first, I had no idea who he was, but when he introduced himself, he said he'd been hired to check on my well-being. I instantly knew my mother was behind it. I showed him the restraining orders and explained the situation. He apologized profusely and said he hadn't known the full story. He dropped the case immediately, promising he wouldn't bother me again. It was almost satisfying, watching the PI realize he'd been roped into a wild goose chase by a manipulative client. Not long after that, my sister made her final, desperate move. She posted an open letter on Facebook, tagging as many family members and friends as she could. In it, she painted me as the villain, claiming I'd abandoned the family after all they'd done for me. She listed out all the supposed ways I'd hurt them, including things that were twisted half-truths or outright lies. It was a full-blown smear campaign, clearly intended to make me look like a monster to anyone who didn't know the full story. Instead of reacting emotionally, I decided it was time for my own masterstroke. I put together a detailed post of my own. I included every receipt, bank statement, and message proving how much financial support I'd given them over the years. I laid out the timeline of events, from the escalating demands to the harassment that led me to file restraining orders. I didn't hold back, and I made sure everything was backed up with evidence. I posted it publicly, tagging only my sister and letting everyone else find it on their own. The response was explosive. My post went viral, not just among our mutual friends, but it started circulating among people who didn't even know us personally. The comments section filled up with support for me, and many people shared similar stories of family entitlement and manipulation. My sister's narrative was completely dismantled. By the end of the day, she'd deleted her open letter and then her entire Facebook account. It was a total backfire, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. The fallout was swift. Friends and extended family members who had sided with my parents started reaching out to apologize. I got messages from people saying they'd had no idea what was really going on and that they were sorry for believing the lies. It felt like a tidal wave of validation after months of being painted as the villain. Even a few relatives who had stayed silent through all of this reached out to say they supported my decision and understood why I'd gone no contact. With the family drama finally behind me, I've been able to focus on building a new life here. I joined a local hiking club, picked up a few new hobbies, and even started dating again. It's strange how quickly things fell into place once I cut out the toxicity. I'm no longer looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next manipulative move from my family. It's like I can finally breathe, without the constant pressure of their expectations weighing me down. In therapy, I talked through everything that had happened, and my therapist noted how much progress I'd made in such a short time. It's incredible how different life feels when you're not constantly being guilt-tripped or manipulated. I'm finding peace in ways I didn't think were possible before. I'm looking forward to this new chapter in my life. I've learned that sometimes the best way to love your family is from a distance, and that's okay. I can still cherish the good memories while accepting that it's healthier for me to keep my distance now. I'm excited to build a life that's truly my own, free from the constant demands and manipulation that once held me back. For anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, trust your instincts, set your boundaries, and remember that it's okay to put yourself first. Sometimes, walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing to live on your own terms. Thanks again, everyone. This will be my final update. I'm signing off for good, ready to move forward and leave this all behind.